Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if learning a sign language might change the way your brain is wired differently from someone who only hears spoken words? This new study dives deep into that fascinating question. So, we all know that our brains are super complex, and language is one of the most amazing things they do. For a long time, scientists have thought that the left side of our brain is the main hub for language. This is true whether you speak or sign. But what happens when your brain doesn't get sound input, and instead you learn a visual language like sign language from birth? Do different parts of the brain step up and get used in new ways? That's the big puzzle this research team wanted to solve. Basically, they wanted to see if the brain pathways that help us process language are different in people who are deaf and learn sign language early in life compared to people who can hear and speak. They looked at something called white matter, which is like the wiring system of your brain, connecting different areas. Think of it like the internet cables connecting computers in a network. The researchers used a special kind of MRI scan called diffusion weighted MRI. This lets them look closely at the structure and integrity of these brain pathways, these white matter tracts. They gathered two groups of people. One group had 24 deaf individuals who learned sign language really early in life, usually from their deaf parents. The other group had 24 hearing people who don't know sign language. All these people had their brains scanned using this special MRI. The MRI provided them with detailed information about the brain's white matter, including how dense these pathways are and how organized the fibers within them are. They used a cool tool called Automated Fiber Quantification, or AFQ, to really get into the details of these pathways, looking at microstructures along the entire length of each tract. This is important because sometimes big average numbers can hide interesting variations. Now for the exciting part, what did they find? Well, when they looked at the left side of the brain, the traditional language powerhouse, they found no big differences between the deaf signers and the hearing non-signers. The main pathways there, including one called the arcuate fasciculus, which is thought to be critical for language, looked pretty much the same in both groups. This is really interesting because it suggests that the core wiring for language might be built the same way regardless of whether you are hearing auditory language or seeing visual language. It's like the fundamental architecture of the language network is robust and doesn't necessarily need sound to develop properly. But here is where it gets really different. When they looked at the right side of the brain, they found some noticeable changes, specifically in a pathway called the right posterior arcuate fasciculus, which connects areas in the back of the temporal lobe to the parietal lobe. They saw more streamlines. You can think of streamlines as the individual fibers that make up these white matter tracts. More streamlines suggest that this pathway might be more developed or use more fibers in deaf signers. And it wasn't just about the number of fibers, they also found differences in the microstructure, the tiny details of how these fibers are organized. In several pathways on the right side of the brain, including the right arcuate fasciculus and the right superior longitudinal fasciculus, they saw evidence of increased fiber organization and directionality. In simpler terms, the wiring in these right hemisphere pathways seemed a bit more refined or distinct in the deaf signers. They also found some interesting differences in a pathway called the uncinate fasciculus, which connects the front of the brain to the side with unique changes on the left and right sides in the deaf group. So, what does all this brain wiring stuff actually mean? The researchers propose that this shows something pretty profound. The left hemisphere's core language network seems to develop in a way that is pretty much the same, whether you are processing spoken words or signed words. This supports the idea that the fundamental biological basis for language is indeed in the left hemisphere and is largely independent of the sensory input used to acquire it. However, the changes they found in the right hemisphere suggest that this side of the brain plays a particularly important role in processing sign language. Since sign language is a visual and spatial language, it makes sense that pathways involved in visual processing, spatial attention, and navigation, which are often associated with the right hemisphere, might be recruited and adapted for language. Think about it. You are not just hearing words, you are seeing complex hand shapes, facial expressions, and body movements happening in space. The right hemisphere might be the part of the brain that is particularly good at handling all that visual and spatial information within the context of language. The study also touched on the uncinate fasciculus, which is involved in things like recognizing faces and understanding social cues. The changes seen here in deaf signers might be related to the fact that sign language relies heavily on facial expressions and body language to convey meaning and grammar. So, their brains might have developed stronger connections in this area to better process these crucial visual communication elements. Now, like any study, this one has its limits. One of the main things they point out is that the measures they use, like fractional anisotropy and mean diffusivity, can tell us that something is different, but they can't pinpoint exactly what that difference is. Is it the thickness of the nerve fibers, how tightly packed they are, or something else? They also mentioned that this was a cross-sectional study, meaning they looked at people at one point in time. It would be even more powerful to follow people over time as they learn languages. They also couldn't directly compare deaf signers to hearing signers in this particular study. This means they can't definitively say if the changes they saw are due to deafness itself, or learning sign language, or a combination of both. Future research could explore groups of hearing people who learned sign language to help untangle these factors. So, what is the big takeaway here? This research is showing us that the brain is incredibly adaptable. While the core language wiring in the left hemisphere seems to be universal, the right hemisphere can show remarkable changes to accommodate the demands of a visually based language like sign language. It highlights that language isn't just about what you hear. It is about how your brain processes information. And that processing can be beautifully shaped by experience and modality. It really underscores the flexibility of the human brain. It's a wonderful reminder that our brains are constantly being shaped by how we interact with the world and each other. If you found this exploration of brain wiring and sign language as mind-blowing as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what fascinates you most about brain plasticity or sign language. And don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into the science of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.